It's 2 o'clock by my clock. Do you want to give another minute to see if we have others joining us, Stephanie?
I think we can begin.
Okay. Well, good afternoon and welcome to everyone who is joining us this afternoon for our program. I am Sister Deborah Trolette, a Sister of Mercy who's currently serving as the Executive Director for the Arkansas House of Prayer. And with me, supporting our technical presence, you might say, this way, is the Reverend Stephanie Fox, who is my Associate Director. So grateful to her for all the help she's giving us, and we'll rely on her if we have any problems, right? Okay. But I'm delighted to welcome you to this program, to our Centering Prayer Workshop. It's being presented by Dr. Nicole and Catherine Cruz. And I can tell you, you're in for a treat. Two very wise folks who have been so dedicated not only to the Centering Prayer practice, but I know from just the House of Prayer itself, these two folks are tremendously dedicated to the mission of the Arkansas House of Prayer and to its sustainability and its expansion in terms of programming and outreach. So again, we're just so blessed that both Nick and Catherine will share their experience and wisdom on centering prayer with you all today. A reminder that the Arkansas House of Prayer is an interfaith haven set apart in nature, dedicated to contemplative prayer, meditation, and quiet, where all are welcome. It is an outreach of the Episcopal Diocese of Arkansas and St. Margaret's Episcopal Church. The House of Prayer is located on Chenal Drive in West Little Rock, on the same campus as St. Margaret's. As we're appreciative of the Reverend Stephanie being with us today to help support this. We also are deeply appreciative that this event is co-sponsored by the Interfaith Center, which is a not-for-profit organization dedicated to reducing hatred and fear among the world's religions. Sophia Saeed is the executive director, and both the House of Prayer and the Interfaith Center were co-founded by the Reverend Susan Sims Smith. The Interfaith Center promotes interfaith awareness, builds bridges across and among different faith traditions and communities by providing educational programs and leadership, especially in times of conflict and special need. The Interfaith Center also provides workshops and teaches people how to enter into interfaith program and begin interfaith programming within their own faith communities and worship centers. So a few Zoom, you might say Zoom etiquette pieces, just as reminders. First of all, it's important that you realize that this program is being recorded, and because we desire to share any of the programs that we can offer in a wider venue. So if you are uncomfortable with being seen, we just ask you to turn your camera off so that is not problematic for you. We also are asking that throughout the program, unless you have a question you're going to ask, or unless you're speaking or reflecting, then just keep yourself on mute. It helps the sound quality and the bandwidth for us all to participate. You can put questions and comments in the chat box if you're familiar with that. It should be a little red circle at the bottom of your screen, and you can place those in the chat box, and Stephanie will help monitor those. Also, just a reminder that Stephanie's cell phone and email address are in the chat box. So if you have would like any additional information about the House of Prayer, you can simply contact her that way, or if you have a technical issue, please let her know. One more thing we would ask at the very end of the program, we have a very brief survey that Stephanie will post. I think it's about 3 questions, but it is extremely important that we get your feedback so that we can better serve you and others with future programs. So again, thank you and welcome. We invite you to visit the Arkansas House of Prayer, especially during this wonderful season of spring when there is new life everywhere. So with that, I'd like to just turn the program over to Nick and Catherine.
Hello and welcome, and I'm delighted to see so many people here, familiar faces and those that are new to me. I hope you really appreciate and enjoy this conference that we're having this afternoon. I'd like to begin by taking a brief look at contemplative prayer in the context of the spiritual journey, because contemplative prayer and practices are known in all the great religious traditions, the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and also the great religions of the East, Buddhism and Hinduism. Thomas Keating defines contemplative prayer as the opening of mind and heart, our whole being, to God, who is the ultimate mystery beyond thoughts, words, and emotions. And centering prayer is a method of contemplative prayer, a prayer of relationship with God, a prayer of consent to God's presence and action in our lives. Jesus's teaching on contemplative prayer are rooted in Jewish wisdom teachings. Be still and know that I am God. I still my soul and make it quiet like a child upon its mother's breast. The Psalms may be the best known of the Jewish wisdom teachings, but wisdom is found throughout all of the part of the Bible that we call the Old Testament. The method of centering prayer is rooted in Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. If you want to pray, enter your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Centering prayer is a prayer of consent to relationship. In our current situation, operating as we each of us do from our personalities, from what we call the false self system, which Nick will be telling you more about later in our presentation, we really cannot consent. We don't have that much management over our thoughts, over our emotions, over our actions. However, we can intend to consent. And the situation of longing to intend is addressed in this excerpt from one of Thomas Merton's poems in his books, Thoughts in Solitude. And Merton writes, "But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope I will never do anything apart from that desire." Centering prayer is a prayer of relationship. And as a relationship develops, either with a person or with God, we begin with acquaintanceship. That is a stage that's informational, that's formal, that can be awkward. In prayer, it's represented by vocal prayer, things such as saying grace before meals, going to church, or going to Sunday school. And as we persist in acquaintanceship, we developed a friendliness. where our relationship becomes more informal and we are more at ease. In the prayer life, it opens us to allow God to speak to us, engaging our energies. A prayerful reading of scripture or experiencing God in nature might be examples of this. From friendliness, a true friendship develops, in which we are committed to each other. We are spontaneous and can be free. There's a growing sense of faith, of confidence, of gratitude, and of sharing. In prayer, it is responsive prayer, where we find ourselves entering into frequent and spontaneous prayer throughout the day, throughout our lives, in which we open our hearts, feelings completely to God. We are no longer trying to hide ourselves from God. And eventually, with time and commitment, we come to the stage of true intimacy, in which we have fidelity to the relationship, in which we experience self-surrender, in which we can be quietly and in silence with another without any need to prove or do anything. In the prayer life, this is the contemplative prayer that is a pure gift opening us to God's presence, resting in God beyond thoughts, words, and emotions. So centering prayer is also a prayer of consent to inner transformation. When we commit ourselves to the practice of centering prayer on a regular basis and to its companion practices in daily life, we must take the transformational journey very seriously. For we are offering ourselves just as we are, and we shall be changed. We will dismantle the false self system. We will find the spiritual self, and we will be surprised. Every time we leave our thoughts and return to our sacred symbol in prayer, our action reveals our intention to consent. God's agenda becomes more important than our personal agenda in prayer and in daily life. So we can go now to the next slide. In interior silence, God brings the new creation that we are becoming to life. The alternation between contemplative prayer and the external action of daily living integrates the two and establishes in us the contemplative dimension of the gospel, which is a transformed state of consciousness. We essentially become the contemplative dimension of the gospel. So now let us prepare to do the action that is the definition of contemplative prayer in Matthew 6:6. If you want to pray, enter your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. The inner room is that spiritual level of our being, the level of intuition and will. Can we go back? When we close the door, we turn off the interior conversation we usually have with ourselves, the judging, evaluating, and reacting that goes on nonstop throughout our waking day. And when we pray to our Father in secret, in silence, it is where the Father speaks to us beyond words, thoughts, and feelings. Okay, thanks. These are the guidelines of centering prayer. They're very simple, but they're not so easy. Choose a sacred word as the symbol of your intention to consent to God's presence and action within. Your sacred word could be a word of 1 or 2 syllables, such as faith, peace, hope, or of 2 syllables, such as Jesus, surrender, but that's 3 syllables. But it needs to be a brief word that doesn't encourage you to continue with thoughts, but just to let go of thoughts. Your sacred word could also be a brief glance at an image that has a meaning for you as a sacred image. Or it could be as simple as returning to your awareness of your breath for 1 or 2 breaths. But it's not meant to be a mantra. It's not meant to be something that you say in order to replace the thoughts or feelings that are going through your mind, simply as a reminder that your intention is to consent to God's presence. And with time, the ability to be in God's presence will grow. Sitting comfortably with eyes closed, settle briefly and silently introduce the sacred word or symbol as the symbol of your consent to God's presence and action within. So before you begin, take a moment to make sure that your body is in a comfortable position and that you physically are relaxed. It's recommended that your back be straight, that your feet be on the floor, and that your hands be empty and comfortably in your lap. When engaged with your thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word. The gentleness is important because if you inwardly tighten and correspondingly inwardly kind of berate yourself for having had thoughts, you disrupt the flow of the gentleness that God is offering you during this time of centering prayer. And you will have thoughts. That's what our mind does. It thinks. And so we just are teaching our mind an alternative way of being. And that takes time and it takes persistence. And so in the meantime, while you're waiting for this to happen in your own brain and in your own life, just return ever so gently to the sacred word or symbol when you discover that your mind is occupied with thoughts. And then at the end of the prayer period, remain in silence with your eyes closed for a couple of minutes. And this is very important to help transfer the feelings, the experiences that you've had of closeness to God into your ordinary life of everyday life. So can we have the next slide? So let's prepare for our prayer session. We will have a 10-minute prayer session. Nick is going to be our timer. And so he will ring bells, 3 bells to begin. And after 10 minutes, a bell, 3 bells for us to stop. And I think there's going to be 1 more bell, 3 bells, and then I'll say something. He'll ring 1 bell, then we'll pray in silence for 10 minutes, and then he'll ring 3 bells. We'll remain in silence briefly, and then we will, I'll say something, and we will come back to our regular awarenesses. So, all right. So Nick, are we ready?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Do you have
some people
anything
may
else
think,
to say? I didn't invite you to say anything else.
so let's go ahead and we'll start with as Catherine said, 3 gongs, and then Catherine will say a few words as kind of a vestibule into the prayer. And then 1 gong will start our 10-minute session of prayer, ending with 3 gongs. This is the protocol we use at the retreat. Obviously, you can do many different ways of timing, but timing is recommended so that there can be a commitment to a certain period. So here we go. If everybody could please mute if you're not talking.
For God alone, my soul in silence waits. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Thanks, Catherine, for that review of centering prayer. And before I get started, would you like to just say a few words to introduce yourself?
Yes, I did realize I forgot to do that in the beginning. Yeah, I'm Catherine Cruz. I'm retired from 40-year practice of psychology. I was introduced to centering prayer in 2002, and I knew at once that it would a practice that would deepen my relationship with God. So I began to practice. I won't say that I was very regular with it. It took some time to get into the rhythm, but I had some gradual improvement. And in 2014, or maybe it was 2013, I attended a retreat at St. Scholastica Monastery in Fort Smith, and Nick was the retreat director. And so I met him and we fell into conversation, and eventually he agreed that he would work with me so that I could go through the process of becoming commissioned to teach and lead retreats myself. And so I'm very grateful for that day when I discovered that retreat and decided to go and met Nick, and for all that he's done for me in these following years. So thank you. And thank you, Nick, for reminding us that we were supposed to begin with this.
One thing good about teaching the welcoming prayer, you can hope that something goes wrong so that you'll have the opportunity to practice the welcoming prayer, or the welcoming practice as it is referred to. So I really appreciate, Catherine, you emphasizing that centering prayer as relationship. Thomas Keating would often say transformation occurs in relationship, and that's relationship with God and with each other. So here we are this afternoon, transforming together. A word about myself. I live in Carbondale, Colorado, and with my wife, Carolyn. I'm a retired physician, practiced ophthalmology. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, attended the Methodist Church growing up a lot, and I might say religiously. I was a spiritual seeker and searched for my spiritual path with diligence. In May of 1990, on the advice of a friend, I attended a 10-day centering prayer retreat at St. Benedict's Monastery in Snowmass, Colorado. This was a classic example of when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And the teacher was in the person of Thomas Keating, who was living at the monastery at that time. And he had begun offering 10-day retreats at the monastery in 1984 to teach centering prayer. The combination of the prayer at that retreat, the 3+ hours a day, and also the material that Thomas taught at that time, it was in VHS tapes. He taught us the concepts behind the prayer. You could say why we need the prayer. So I was so taken by this retreat that I went back in December and learned how to teach the prayer. And in 1993, I started serving retreats at the monastery. So I've been to a lot of retreats, and one of the things those of us who serve retreats say is that the reason we have to go to so many retreats is that we're slow learners. But I have to say that the gift has been in the learning. So it's the most enjoyable job I've ever had, serving retreats. And that's how I met Catherine, as she mentioned, at St. Scholastica. So I just want to mention that one of the best gifts of that first retreat was that Thomas Keating, through his teachings, helped me to integrate psychology and religion in a way that I didn't think possible. So before I get started with the teaching, I'd like to offer a prayer. Holy Spirit, please help me get out of the way and speak through me to convey what we all need to hear today. Amen. So Stephanie, could we have the first slide? And you can relax. I only have 3 slides. This is what we see when we look to the south from our home. It's called Mount Sopris, and we believe it's a sacred mountain, as did the Ute Indians, whose land we're on as we speak. Mountains are awe-inspiring and assist us in embracing humility. The spiritual journey leads us into humility. Lord, I'm not worthy to receive you, but only say the word and I shall be healed. So let's look at why we need a spiritual practice like centering prayer. In the words of E.E. Cummings, to be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight and never stop fighting. You might see something of a paradox in those words spoken at a presentation that's supposed to teach us how to let go and accept, to, in a word, stop fighting. But Richard Rohr said something to me a long time ago that I've always remembered, and that is the spiritual journey is filled with paradox. In fact, he says if you encounter something on the spiritual journey that's not paradox, you might be a little suspicious. So, Thomas Keating has deemed our ordinary self, the self we have created to navigate the slings and arrows of life. He's characterized that as the false self. Carl Jung called it the persona. Some refer to it as the ego or the small self. For most of my life, I thought this was all I was. the first glimmer of psychological transformation of the false self is to become aware that there is another part of me that has the ability to observe my false self. And I would like to recommend a book at this time. It's called Centering Prayer and Inner Awakening. And it is going to be listed in the resources that will be emailed to you, resources that we've used to put this presentation together. And Cynthia Bergeau, I hope I said that right, Catherine. Catherine's from New Orleans, and she corrected me on my pronunciation of Bergeau. So I'm going to work on that, part of my transformation. So the false self, or the small self, will never be able to transform itself. We can't move a plank on which we are standing. Contemplative prayer will help us strengthen and develop our ability to watch what is going on. The ego is always concerned with content. How is what I perceive happening? How is it going to help me get what I want? Keating has called this our programs for happiness. Slide number 2, please. Very good. Thank you, Stephanie. So here's a diagram from Cynthia's book on centering prayer and inner awakening. And it's called The False Self in Action. And I might mention that Cynthia, actually, she and I did our first 10-day retreat together in May of 1990. And I'm sure probably all of you know that she's gone on to become a respected author and retreat leader. And so she also during that time became a student, and I would say a protege of Thomas Keating. And she's edited some of his books and written several books of herself. And if you are going to use one book to help in learning spiritual practices, I think Centering Prayer and Inner Awakening might be that book. Of course, we won't use one book. We all have a lot of books. And so, but here's a diagram, and we see down below the horizontal dashed line in the middle, which designates consciousness, we see in the unconscious portion a triangle. And it's entitled Emotional Programs for Happiness. And there are 3 energy centers that are part of these emotional programs for happiness. Sounds like somebody's chewing on something. Well,
or walking on gravel.
Yeah, maybe somebody was doing the labyrinth. So here we are with the emotional programs for happiness, power and control, esteem, affection, security, and survival. All of these things are part of what make up the false self. And it should be mentioned that there's nothing wrong with any of these things that I just mentioned. What the problem comes when we become attached to them. And a good distinction on that is Thomas Keating used to like to quote a book by Ken Keyes, K-E-Y-E-S, The Handbook to Higher Consciousness. And in that book, Ken made a distinction between a demand and a preference. And that's a good distinction the false self is into demand. As we become more conscious, we can shift from demanding to preferring. So we're going along our merry way. We have these programs for happiness. We have things that we are attracted to and things that we are want to get away from. Those are termed attachments and aversions in the diagram. And within all this is hidden agendas. That's part of how the false self operates. And the false self believes in order to be happy, it has to be secure, esteemed, and in control. So we encounter forces as we go through our lives that tend to sabotage our programs for happiness. And we can term those triggering events when things don't go our way. And that results in frustration. And it's a very quick trip from frustration into what are termed the afflictive emotions, which are anger, hurt, fear, envy, jealousy. You might say the 7 deadly and then some. We start telling ourselves stories to justify our feeling, to rationalize the afflictive emotion. We embrace victimhood. The emotional turmoil then fades into the unconscious, and we are ready for another cycle. The Buddhists refer to this as the wheel of suffering. But wait, you see there's a place, 5A in the diagram, where the cycle can be broken. That place where we first experience, where we become aware of the frustration of our programs. Some people have termed this the gap. And it truly is a gap, particularly in the early going. And Cynthia refers to this place as putting a stick in the spoke of the recurring cycle. You'll find that Cynthia has wonderful metaphors. So, in order to utilize this gap, there has to be some degree of observing self. If we aren't able to have some ability to look and see what the false self is up to, we are doomed to keep cycling through this diagram. So centering prayer and other spiritual practices are methods of strengthening this observing self. And here's a quote from Thomas Keating. If you do centering prayer and don't bring it into active life, like by using the active prayer, the welcoming prayer, guard of the heart, forgiveness prayer practice, if you don't bring the centering prayer into your daily life, he says you will have trouble. So today we're going to explore the welcoming practice. And the next thing we're going to do is tune into a YouTube video segment by Mary Dwyer. Mary is a master teacher, has been teaching the welcoming prayer for many years. Some of you might have even seen Mary. She was at St. Mark's Church probably 10 to 12 years ago and taught an all-day workshop on the welcoming prayer practice. So you can see today you're getting an abbreviated version. But one thing I do want to mention, since we may or may not have time for comments and questions from all of you, which really makes the whole deal richer and more fun and more educational. If we may have some time right at the end for that, but be that as it may, Catherine and I are going to stay on at the end of the workshop and engage in conversation with questions you might have or comments. So please feel free to stay on with us, and we'll stay as long as people want to talk. So let's see, Stephanie, I'm going to tee up this video. I believe that's the plan. And let's just see how good I've gotten at this. Well, so here's a very good place for me to do the welcoming prayer. My program for happiness has been hijacked here. So I'm going to try it again. And welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay. So I wish it was always that easy. So here we have Mary Dwyer. This is going to be about 7 minutes. And this is something of a meditation. And I think of this, what Mary is presenting, as presenting the welcoming prayer practice or the welcoming practice in slow motion. And we'll talk a little more about that after this 7-minute presentation. So here is Mary Dwyer on the welcoming practice.
So take a moment first to look around. See this wonderful community gathered with the intention to say yes in this moment. Yes to being beacons of light, of peace in a world terrorized by fear and anxiety. Allow a deep belly breath and another. This moment, nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. This moment. I've put up the welcoming prayer wording. And movement 1 is a very gentle yet critical moment of allowing our full attention to feel and sink into whatever we are experiencing in this moment in our bodies. So just allow your inner awareness to become cognizant of what may be calling you. I feel it in my shoulders, where my neck meets my spine. And I allow myself to breathe into and sink into this moment. Where do you feel it in your body? Allow yourself to become one. Lean into and breathe into your experience in your body in this moment. Movement 2, we gently but clearly state welcome. Welcome. It is our way of consenting to God's presence and action in the most faultless way in what we are experiencing in our bodies in this moment. Welcome. Welcome. As we become fully immersed in this experience, we are able to say, I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. I embrace this moment as it is. If the sensation moves or intensifies, stay with it. Continue to breathe into whatever the experience in your being is in this moment. Any tension behind your eyes, any tightness in your gut, any stiffness in your spine, whatever is attracting your attention, sink into it. Fully become one with your experience in this moment. Welcome. Welcome. I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. I embrace this moment as it is. Yes. Yes. We allow ourselves to be present, fully alive, without hesitation, resistance, or judgment of how our bodies are manifesting this moment. I would like to share a reading from Thomas Keating from the Contemplative Outreach newsletter from June of 2015. Notes from a deep conversation.
So, thank you, Mary Dwyer. And one thing I want to emphasize is that there's nothing wrong with any of those qualities of security, esteem, control, security, affection, in her words. The problem comes when we have to have them when we're addicted. And so that is an important distinction. We're not going to ever get rid of our preference to be secure, to be esteemed, and to have some control over our lives. As probably it seems like the best we can do is pseudo control. And certainly if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that we don't have control over our lives. And in the words of the 12-step program, our lives have become unmanageable. And I might mention at this point, and kind of in keeping with what Thomas Keating said, that centering prayer, or contemplative prayer alone is not enough. Centering prayer has certainly been a transforming influence in my life, but so has the 12-step program, which I actually got into before I did my first centering prayer retreat as an adult child of an alcoholic. So I think that we can use all the resources. In my case, antidepressant medication has been important to me. Also therapy. And probably one of the most important influences in my transformation occurred in August of 2004 when a woman whose name is Carolyn came to a centering prayer retreat at Snowmass, August of 2004, a retreat I was serving. And we, of course, didn't communicate much at the silent retreat, but we did stay in touch afterwards. And one thing led to another. And in October of 2009, we got married. And we're having a great time here in Colorado. And I often said that's one of the best gifts that centering prayer has given to me. So I'd like to go back to a slide. Let's see. I'm going to try this again just to see if I can do it another time. Yeah. Catherine, I put this slide back up because I know you had something you wanted to add in terms of the emotional programs and the false self. If you could share that with us.
I'll be glad to, Nick. I think you really addressed it, but I'll say it in my words. It's important to remember that our need for security, our need for acceptance and esteem, our need for some control over our lives, over ourselves and our lives, those are instinctual. They're God-given. They come with the human package. And it's not the need itself that is the problem. The problem that is created by our is the way that we think they have to be fulfilled. And that starts, maybe even prenatally, but certainly from the earliest days after birth, we start to learn how those basic needs are going to be fulfilled in our culture, in our family, in our lives. And those are that is what builds our emotional programs for happiness and teaches us what to approach and what to avoid. And builds our hidden agendas and teaches us how we will respond to frustration. So I just think that it's important to remember that our instincts are part of our human package, and that we can learn different ways to deal with those programs that get built up around them.
Yes, and that's a good segue into a reminder that the false self is not something to be seen as the enemy or something we have to, E.E. Cummings aside, it's not something we have to fight, although we will do that a lot. But the false self needs to be integrated. And if you read Cynthia's book, I believe it's in that book, she talks about a young man who was pursued by this ogre. I'm sure this story has many different forms, but this entity was pursuing him all over the world, and he went every place, went across the sea and hid away in caves, but this entity was always right behind him. And it continued to make his life miserable until finally he turned and embraced the entity, and the entity became a part of him. And so I think that that is a good illustration of how we need to integrate our false selves, because our false self has gotten us to some degree to where we are right now. It's just that it's like the false self doesn't know its own limitations. Let's put it that way. So I want to emphasize too that obviously life is not going to permit us to do a 7-minute welcoming prayer practice. As refreshing and calming as that is. In fact, I think this meditation, this is a meditation, a guided meditation that Mary did, but it's like looking at the prayer in slow motion. And then as we become more familiar with the prayer, it'll be shortened to where we can do it in 60 or 90 seconds or less. And a story that I like helps illustrate how we can use the welcoming practice. There were a bunch of convicts who had been in prison together for a long time, and they were telling the same old jokes over and over again. And they were still funny, they laughed, but they got tired of having to go through the whole joke. So they assigned a number to each joke. And so they'd be out there working in the field and somebody would say 605, and everybody would just break out laughing. And I think of the welcoming prayer like that in a way. Think of the frustration when our programs for happiness get sidetracked. That's like calling out a number. And when we become familiar enough so that this welcoming practice is really a part of us all the time, or at least it's available all the time, then we'll be able, without even going through the litany, we will shift ourselves into a place of being with whatever is going on in that moment and embracing it and coming to terms with it. And I believe that as more of us are able to use the welcoming practice in that way, that there is the ability to transform the world. And of course, we know that the world is only going to be transformed one person at a time. And as much as sometimes we would like to work other people's program, and help them, we all have plenty to do with our own false self, or at least I do. So I noticed that we're at about 2:12 or 3:12 in Arkansas.
Nick, can you stop screen sharing?
Oh, sorry.
See each other.
Thank you.
See you.
So
Can I share something from this book, Open Mind, Open Heart?
please.
And Nick, could you please make me host again?
Do what?
Could you please allow me to be host again?
I don't know, Stephanie. Let me think about that. Let's see now. I've got to remember how to do that.
To participants is an easy way to do it if you go to participants.
Yeah, okay. All right, so. I don't see you listed there.
Probably Arkansas House of Prayer.
Okay. Arkansas has House of Prayer. There you go.
So we've talked throughout this meeting about the importance of continuing the practice of centering prayer outside of the actual prayer time. And we do that through other practices. And if you are interested, this book, Open Mind, Open Heart, in the appendices, there is a whole array of practices that will help you be able to keep your contemplative heart and mind open to bring that into daily life. And it begins with cultivating a basic acceptance of yourself and who you are, including all of your history, your failings, your limitations, as well as your strong points. It includes things like choosing an active prayer sentence to use during the day, or keeping guard of the heart, or carrying a minute book to record things that come to you, practicing the welcoming prayer. So this gives you a lot of choices about how to bring the effects of centering prayer, contemplative mindset into your daily life. So.
Thanks, Catherine. Stephanie, could we see if there's we have about 10 minutes before we will close with 5 minutes of prayer, but could we see if there are any questions or comments?
Do people know how to do that?
Yeah, we'll need to make sure they can unmute themselves. So have you enabled that, Stephanie?
People can unmute themselves, and if they raise their hand, I can try to spotlight on them when they ask their question.
Okay, and I'll go on mute right now.
Do you mean physically raise their hands like this, Stephanie?
Visually, that makes it quicker, or
Okay.
yes. I don't see any hands, but I'll listen to a voice.
I know there are people here from everywhere, and my question is, I know Russellville, Arkansas has a weekly contemplative prayer class. What else is, would other people like to highlight what their community offers?
Well, I'll just say since we've had the pandemic, even though we're in Colorado, we're still meeting with a centering prayer group in Fayetteville. And that's at 6 o'clock Central Time on Tuesday evenings. If anyone is interested in that, are you going to be able to put our emails on, and phone numbers on the resource list, Stephanie?
I
Yes.
think they're already there.
Okay.
I'm going to send out an email when we're done with a resource reading list as well as contact information if you have additional questions for our presenters.
Okay. So,
And it also has a lovely brief way to prepare your body for centering prayer to relax, especially for the second session that comes after you've been busy with things all day long.
So in terms of resources, this is Susan Sim-Smith. Sophia Said, a Muslim spiritual teacher, and Annabelle Tuck, a Jewish spiritual teacher, and I do a once a month, 1 hour teaching from the different faith perspectives about silence that includes 15 minutes of sitting in silence together and 15 minutes of Q&A. And I'm sure Stephanie will put that information about that in the material that she's going to send to you later. And everybody's welcome.
It's wonderful if you have a chance to attend that. It's an early 7:30 Central Time, early on a Tuesday morning. There also are, if you go to the Contemplative Outreach website and look, I think the link is to Meditation Chapel. There are a stunning array of centering prayer opportunities via Zoom, all hours of the day and night, I think. So you're welcome to join any of those. It's free of charge, although you do need to register so they can send you the link to join the Zoom meeting. So.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay, so this is for Nick. Hey, Nick, this is Catherine Shoulders
yes.
in Little Rock. So I've heard you speak of contemplative prayer, and I've read a little bit about it, but I've never actually done it myself. But I have done my own practice of entering my intuitive space and trying to tap in. And when I do that, I am intending to be connecting to my source, God. But my question is it appropriate or useful to have a question or a concern in mind and to hope for guidance, or is the contemplative prayer to more than anything just repeat the phrases and just remain completely open with no agenda? And I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. Well, it's good to have you with us, Catherine. And I appreciate the question. Certainly, my first response is that whatever works is good. And I think it is important, if we're going to use a spiritual practice, to learn that spiritual practice and practice it as it was conceived, be it centering prayer or Vipassana meditation or guided meditation, breath work, whatever. So if what you're doing is helpful to you in some way, I would certainly support you in that. But the question I heard within that is, do you come to the session, and I'm going to speak of centering prayer, with an agenda? And the answer is no. All we have to do is show up. And the recommended beginning dose is 20 minutes twice a day. And the most important thing is being true to the practice. But the idea, Thomas Keating has called it the divine therapy. So maybe if we go to a human therapist, we might go there with questions, but in centering prayer, we come and as Catherine taught us about the growing relationship we have with God in the practice. And I would say that, so I would encourage you or anyone to learn, based on my own experience, to learn centering prayer and try it. Centering prayer may not be for everyone, but that's my response. I appreciate the question.
That answers my question, which had been, what do you recommend? You mentioned timing is very important. And I wondered if starting at 10 minutes was once a day or whatever. So you're saying the prescription is 20 minutes twice a day for beginners and people like you and Catherine.
But I appreciate you bringing that up, Jane, because 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 1 or 2 minutes, if you can't do 20 minutes. So I don't think that there's anything magic. Someone did a study, and I think that 20 minutes it decided that was long enough for the body to sit still. But obviously people at retreats now, a lot of the retreats we're doing 30-minute sessions, and some people do longer. So, but I do think that, particularly with families and jobs and all that kind of thing, if you can start off with whatever you can do. And then, of course, like any practice, whether it's exercise or whatever, the idea is that you add time to the practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add something. I think that's very wise to start where you are, and you'll get to a point where you want to make it longer, up to 20 minutes. But I do think that if you decide that you're going to do 5 minutes, that it's better to do the 5 minutes, because if you just leave the time open-ended, it really gives your opportunity of self-judgment, free hand in affecting your prayer. You're going to say, I'm going to do 10 minutes, and 3 minutes into it, you're just having such trouble. You say, okay, that's enough. So learn to get through those tough times. I guess it's not impossible that they won't happen, but I certainly don't know anybody who gets to avoid that stage of the prayer, and it can show up anytime, even after you've been doing it for a long time. And just hang in there and welcome it and stay with it, and keep at it, keep showing up. Things will change. You'll change. We don't change our circumstances, we change ourselves.
So one thing that we don't need is any more guilt about how long. I mean, that's part of the spiritual journey and the transformation, is to let go of feeling guilty. And one of the things Thomas liked to say is that you can't do the prayer wrong. And certainly as we do the prayer more, our prayer evolves. But the only way you can do the prayer wrong is to get up and leave. So all we have to do is show up. Simple as that. And I wish we had more time. I really encourage people to hang on. I'd love to engage in some more conversation. I know the person who asked about different possibilities in various locations, there may have been other people who wanted to share in answering that, but so Catherine and I will stay on. But before we start our last centering prayer practice, I want to thank Reverend Stephanie Fox for being the technical person. She's also, as Sister Deborah mentioned, the assistant to Sister Deborah. Thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie has several jobs. We really appreciate you finding time to help Catherine and I. I think you all saw that I'm not an expert with the screen sharing, but I'm better than I used to be. So I want to also acknowledge Sister Deborah has already done our introduction, but I just love you, Sister Deborah, and what you have brought to the Arkansas House of Prayer. I was on the board for several years, and it's always been good, and everybody was always doing their best. But Sister Deborah, your best is real good. So thanks. Also, I want to mention Sophia Said. Susan mentioned her. She is the Muslim person who is director of the Interfaith Center. And she would have been with us today, but her father recently died and she's in Pakistan. So please keep Sophia in your prayers. And I want to thank Catherine for joining me in this endeavor. It's been fun. And a person I'm not supposed to mention is Susan Sims-Smith, who is she's my good friend, she and Rick, and but also she has co-created, I would say, a place in Arkansas for people to come and to be in the silence and to experience the power of being in the silence at the Arkansas House of Prayer. And if any of you have not been there, please go there and enjoy it. And Susan, I want to personally thank you for being my friend and your part in my transformative process. So I think we're ready now for our closing 5 minutes of prayer. And I know we're a little bit over time, but anything else that needs to be said before we close with 5 minutes of prayer, and then Susan will end our time together, or at least this part of our time together, with a prayer. And remember, anybody who wants to stay on, please do. One other thing I want to mention is that there will be a 5-day centering prayer retreat at Subiaco Monastery in November 26th through 30th of this year. And the contact information and to register for the retreat is in the resources. So that's November 26th through 30th at Subiaco, a centering prayer retreat. Retreats are a wonderful way to jumpstart a practice and also to strengthen a practice. So hope some of you will be there for that.
And please make us make our next presentation, our next workshop better by completing the evaluation form. Just 3 questions that will show up when this is over. Does it just pop up on the screen?
It's in the chat, and I
Oh.
can also email it out to people when I send the resource list, but it just takes a moment. If you'll click on the link in the chat, you can complete it.
But the chat will go away, right?
When we end,
So you'll put it in the resources too then?
I'll email it also, yes.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have anything before we start our prayer?
A generous thank you to Catherine and Nick for this wonderful afternoon. Let us pray. Eternal Father, Divine Mother, beloved friend, Holy One, may our meditation be deep and filled with your Spirit, and may our daily lives reflect our quiet time with you. Amen. Blessings.
Yes.
Blessings.
Blessings.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody that wants to stay on, please do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nick, I have made you the host.
Thank you.
Thanks.